This is the course which will teach you 3 core technologies of front-end web development from scratch. Technologies which are the most popular and widely used today: HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Welcome to Front-end Web Development Bootcamp. Build a Twitter clone. Hi, I'm George and this is Lasha. We are the creators and designers of this course and we represent Code and Create. So in this course we're going to be teaching you the main concepts of HTML, CSS and JavaScript with several crash courses, and then based on those technologies we will build a Twitter clone along the way. It won't be the exact copy of Twitter, but the most part will be similar. I mean the user interface, and also we will add some functionality to it. Let's talk a little about the course content. We are going to start from the HTML crash course, in which we will go through some main concepts of HTML. After that we will move on to CSS, in which you will learn about basics and not only the basic stuff. Once we are done with CSS crash course, we will move on to CSS Flexbox, which is a one-dimensional layout module, and it allows us to manage the alignment of elements on the page. Next comes CSS Grid, which, like the Flexbox, is used to create the layout of the page, but unlike the Flexbox, it is a two-dimensional layout module. Once we go through those sections, then we'll start building our project, in which you will get a solid experience in HTML and CSS. We will design all 3 pages of the project, I mean the main page, login page and newsfeed page. But this should be just the design without any functionality. After that we will move on and start learning about JavaScript with JavaScript crash course. It should be followed by the DOM crash course. DOM is a document object model which allows us to interact with and manipulate on the HTML document with the help of JavaScript. After going through those 2 sections, we will add some functionality to our project, and for that we will use JavaScript and DOM. Finally, once we finish building our project, we will make it responsive for all different screen sizes, so you will learn about how the responsive web design works. This course consists of lots of different sections and topics. If you feel confident in any of them, you can feel free, skip it and jump directly into the section which you are interested in. Actually, before we start writing the code, we need to set up some tools, and those tools are just the text editor and the modern web browser. Throughout the course we are going to be using Visual Studio Code, which is a free and also one of my favorite text editors. As for the web browser, I'm going to use mostly Google Chrome, but besides that, in a couple of sections we will be using Mozilla Firefox as well. Actually, you might have your own favorite code editor or web browser, and it's absolutely okay. You can feel free and use them, but nowadays I think that the VS Code, Google Chrome and Mozilla Firefox are one of the best and handy tools to use. I'm sure that you already know how to install and use Google Chrome, so I'm not going to waste time on that. As for the VS Code, in order to download it, you have to visit code.visualstudio.com. Then you have to click this button and download. Once it is downloaded, let's go ahead and start the installation process. We have to check here, I accept the agreement. Click next. Then I'm going to check the first checkbox in order to create the shortcut icon on desktop, and also make sure that those boxes are checked as well. It will allow us to open files and folders with VS Code by right click. Click next and then click install. Actually, I've already installed VS Code, so I'm not going to do it again. Alright, so once you install VS Code, then you will be ready to go, so see you in the next video. What is HTML? So in this video we will briefly discuss what HTML actually is, what it stands for and what its main job. If there is anyone who wants to start learning web development, it's impossible to do that without starting with HTML. It's very simple to learn, but at the same time, it's extremely important to know. So HTML, I mean the abbreviation itself, stands for Hypertext Markup Language, The first thing that you have to keep in mind is that HTML is not a programming language. You cannot program anything at any level using HTML. In general, every programming language works based on some logic. For example, in case of conditional statements, if some condition is true, then we do one thing. And if the condition is false, then we do another thing. In HTML, we don't have such logic. So it is a static language, and it's used to build blocks of the web page. In other words, it describes the structure of your web page. I mean the content which is represented by, let's say, headings, paragraphs, images, lists, input elements, and etc. is created with HTML. If you visit any website, the content that you see, for example, information that comes from the server, is rendered as the HTML document. Behind the scenes of every website, there might be lots of different logic, I mean lots of different work, but eventually, as a result, every user sees information represented by HTML document. So I believe you guess very well how important it is to know HTML, and the good news, what we already have mentioned, is that it's really simple to learn and use. Nowadays, the current version of HTML is HTML5, so HTML4 is already the past, and throughout this section we'll be using, of course, HTML5. In order to use HTML, we don't need any server or some kind of compiler, because the browser is able to read and display HTML document without any help of other tools. I mean servers or compilers and so on. HTML files should have .html extensions. All the elements are represented by tags, but browsers do not display those tags, they use them to display the content of the page. Alright, so that was a little introduction. Alright, so now it's the practice time. In the last lecture we had a brief overview of what HTML is, and now in this video we're going to create our very first basic HTML document. First of all, let's go ahead and create a new folder on the desktop. Let's call it HTML crash course. And then inside it, let's create a new file with name index.html. As you remember from the previous lecture, every HTML file should have a .html extension. Actually, there is a chance that you might not see this extension of the file by default. In order to make it visible, you have to go to View, and then you have to make sure that this little box is checked. Once you check this box, then as the extension of the file, you might see .txt, and you just need to get rid of it. Alright, once you name the file in the correct way, let's go ahead and open it with your text editor. In our case, I'm going to open it with VS Code. Actually, you are able to create the file from your text editor as well. For that, you can either click this little icon here, or by right click you can choose to create a file or new file, whatever you see in your text editor. Alright, let's go ahead and start building a basic HTML structure. The first tag that we have to create is called doctype HTML. We have to open angle bracket, then we need to place exclamation mark, and then in uppercase we have to write doctype, and then in lowercase HTML. Actually, it is a declaration which represents the type of the document. It tells the browser that the page represents an HTML5 document. As you see, I have written doctype in uppercase, but it's not case sensitive. It's just the convention writing it in uppercase. Okay, doctype is followed by HTML tag. As you see, the text editor helped us and it auto-completed the element. I mean, it added to HTML element the closing tag. By the way, in HTML, most of the elements have opening and closing tags. Closing tags are represented with a /, but besides them, we also have self-closing tags, and you will meet them in the coming lectures. Alright, so the HTML element is used to wrap the entire HTML document. Next, we have to create another element which is called the head. This element includes information such as a title for the document. Also, we can insert inside of it scripts, styles, some meta tags, and also links for different files or sources. everything that we insert inside of the head element is not going to be displayed on the web page. Alright, let's go ahead and insert here element called title, which is represented by title tag. And as the content, let's write here basic HTML document. Okay, let's save using Ctrl S and then run this file in the browser. There are a few different ways to do that. I'm going to run the file from the File Explorer. Let's just double click the file and it should be opened in Google Chrome. So as you can see, the web page is completely empty for now because we have not created any content yet. The only thing that we can see here is the title, which is displayed on the tab of the browser. So that's the place where the title of your web page is going to be displayed. Alright, so in order to create and display the content of your web page, first of all, you have to insert in your HTML document element called body, which actually will wrap the entire content of the web page. I mean the content that is going to be visible. So for example, if we insert here some text, let's say hello world, then if you save it and reload the page, then it's going to be displayed on the page. So again, everything that you pass inside the body element is always visible on the page. Alright, so that's the basic structure of HTML document. Those are the main elements which you need to create in order to make your HTML document working properly. Before we finish this lecture, I'm going to show you one more thing. In VS Code, there is a built-in package called Emmet. If you're using different text editor, then you should install it manually from the extension manager. So Emmet allows us to create an element with some shortcuts, and using it we are able to create the basic HTML structure with just a simple step. Let's go ahead and delete everything from here. Then we have to place exclamation mark, and if I hit the tab, then it automatically will generate the basic structure of HTML document. At a glance, you can see that it's a little bit different from what we have created in this video. You see here some other elements, I mean some meta tags, and also inside HTML tag there is specified language as English. Basically, meta tag provides some metadata about HTML document. They are used to specify, for example, page description, some keywords which you need for search engine optimization, and also some other metadata. In our case, the VS Code has generated 3 different meta tags. The first one, I mean char_set attribute, specifies the character encoding for the HTML document. The second one is used for the web page responsiveness. And also we have here the third one, which allows us to make our web page compatible for older versions of Internet Explorer. Actually, those things may sound a little bit complicated for now, but you don't have to pay much attention to those things at this point. Okay. So in this lecture we have learned about how to create the basic structure of HTML document. Next we're going to learn how to create different elements in HTML, and for that let's move on to the next lecture. Alright, so in the previous lecture we saw how to create the basic structure of HTML document, and also we have learned about how to run HTML file in the browser. In this video we're going to describe some specific HTML elements, and you will see how to display different types of text on the web page. Before we move on and start writing some code, I want to show you how to create comments in the HTML document. Basically, comments are used to describe the code or to make some notes, and also you can use comments in order to pause the code. I mean to terminate working it. Okay, so to create a comment you have to open an angle bracket followed by the exclamation mark. Then we need double dashes. I'm going to insert here some text, let's say headings, because we're going to discuss how to use headings in HTML. And then we have to close the comment again using double dash and angle bracket without exclamation mark. So now this text is treated as the comment. If I save and then reload the page, we won't get any text on the page. Actually, in the VS Code there is a shortcut to create comments. You need to press Ctrl and / and the comment will be generated automatically. Alright, So as we said, we're going to learn about how to use headings in HTML. We have 6 types of headings. Let's go ahead and create the first one. For that, I'm going to use h1 tag with the text heading 1. So if I reload the page, then the text will be displayed. As you can see, its size is bigger than the size of plain text. Actually, the heading element has some default styles, and in order to show it, I'm going to use Google Chrome Developer Tools. In order to open it, there are a few different ways. You can either click this little menu icon here, then hover over More Tools and select Developer Tools. Or you can use right-click and select Inspect the Page. Or you can just press F12 button and the Developer Tools should be opened. As you see at the bottom of the page, there is opened a new window which consists of several parts. Inside the Elements tab, we see the structure of our HTML document. It is placed on the left side of the Developer Tools window. You can find here the comments which we have just created and also the heading element. Actually, we're able to manipulate on our code from here. For that, you can use a right-click, then choose Edit as HTML. So if I change here the text, let's write test, and then if I hit Ctrl with Enter, the text will be edited and changed inside here and also on the page as well. Actually, this kind of editing is not permanent. We cannot change the actual code. If I refresh the page, then we will get the previous content back. Alright, on the right hand side of the Developer Tools, we can find styles of our elements. As we said, by default, the h1 element has some default styles. For example, the display block, its font size is 2 EMs, it has some margin as well, and etc. Actually, it is some CSS stuff which will be discussed in the next section, so do not worry much about them right now. Okay, right after styles we see another tab called Computed, which actually gives us some additional information about the styles of an element. You can find here that the color of the text is black. Also, the font size is computed in pixels. 2 EMs is equivalent to 32 pixels, and also here are some other default styles as well. Alright, so the Developer Tools is really a helpful and useful tool, and we will be using it frequently throughout the course. Let's go back to our HTML headings. As we said, we can define 6 different types of heading elements. Next one is represented by the h2 tag, so let's open it and write the content heading 2. So if I reload the page, then we will get here the second heading, which is slightly smaller than the previous one. By default, it has a smaller font size. If we check it from the Developer Tools, we will see that its font size is equal to 1.5 EM, which is equivalent to 24 pixels. Alright, in the exact same way we can define the rest of the headings. I'm going to duplicate this line of code 4 times. Actually, in order to duplicate the code, we have to press Shift, Alt and the down arrow, and the code should be duplicated. Now we have to change the tag names and the content. The next one is going to be h3. In order to change tag names quickly, I'm going to use multi-cursor. In my case, I should press Ctrl and then I place cursors for several times wherever I want. If the Control key doesn't work for you, then the alternate shortcut could be an Alt key. Okay, let's go ahead and change quickly tag names and the heading names as well. So if I reload the page, then we will get 6 different heading elements. They are distinct from each other with font size. Alright, so that's all about HTML heading elements. Overall, we have 6 different types of headings. The next element that I want to show you is a paragraph. Let's make here a new comment. Write paragraphs. So in order to create a paragraph, we have to use the p tag. Basically, paragraphs are used to represent some kind of big text. I mean the text like the article. I'm going to insert here some dummy text. For that, we can use lorem ipsum, which actually allows us to generate some text. In order to do that, I'm going to use emmet we have to write here shortcut lorem, and then we need to specify how many words we want to insert. Let's say 40. Then if we press tab, we will get some dummy text. Okay, let's go ahead and reload the page. As you see, we got here paragraph on the page. Like heading, paragraph has its default styles as well. Alright, as you can see, all the elements that are displayed on the page are placed on a new line. Each element takes up the full width of the page that is available. It happens because headings and paragraphs are block level elements. In HTML, every element can be considered as a block level or inline level. In the case of inline elements, they take up width that is required to display the content of the element, and they are not placed on a new line. As an example of the inline element, we can consider span elements. In general, the span tag is used to add a hook to a part of the text. For example, if you want to color some part of text from CSS, you can wrap this text with a span element. By default, it won't change anything to the text. Alright, let's insert here hello. Then duplicate this line of code and change the content, write world. Let's save, then reload the page. As you can see, those two words are placed side by side. They do not take up a new line on the page, they just take up the width that is required to display the content of an element. In order to prove that, I'm going to click this little icon here, which actually allows us to highlight elements on the page. If I hover over the headings and also the paragraph, you will see that they take up full width that is available on the page, because as we said, they are block level elements. As for span elements, they take up width that is needed to display the content. So actually, that's the main difference between inline and block level elements. Alright, actually that's it what I wanted to show you in this lecture. Let's take a quick break here and move on to the next lecture. Alright, in the last lecture we have discussed how to create different types of text in HTML using headings and paragraphs. And now in this video we're going to be talking about how to create different types of lists in HTML. Okay, as you notice, I have placed text editor and browser side by side because I think it will make our working process more convenient. Before we start creating HTML lists, I'm going to install one package called Live Server, which will allow us to run code without reloading page each time. Once we save the code, then it will be displayed on the page automatically. So we have to go to an extension manager, then we have to search for Live Server and click Install. Once it is installed, then in order to run the file with the Live Server, you have to use right click and then choose Open with Live Server. As you see, new tab is opened in the browser, and also if we look at URL, we will find that instead of just file path, we have here some IP address with some port number. It means that we already work with the Live Server. Now if I make some change here, let's add some more text to the paragraph. Then if I save, changes will be automatically displayed on the page without reloading the page. So I recommend installing a Live Server package because it is really helpful. Okay, let's go ahead and start creating lists. Basically, lists are used quite frequently when you work on building the websites. For example, you may have the lists in your navigation, which actually exists on almost every website. Also, you may have a list on the sidebar, in the footer, and so on. Alright, let's make here new comment. Right, lists. In order to create lists, you have to use UL tag, which stands for the unordered list. And then inside UL tag, you have to insert LI tag, which stands for the list item. Let's write here as a content HTML. Then duplicate list items a couple of times, and instead of HTML, write some other technology names. Let's say CSS. JavaScript, and let's say React. Alright, so if I save, then the list will be displayed on the page. As you can see, it has some default styles. List items have default bullets. Also, we have some padding and margin. Actually, they are used to define some space inside and outside of element box. It is again CSS stuff, which will be discussed later on. Okay, so that's it, how we can create an unordered list in HTML. Besides that, we have another type of HTML list, which is called an ordered list. Let's go ahead and create it, duplicate this entire list. And the only thing that we have to do is to change UL tag. Instead of it, we need OL tag, which itself stands for an ordered list. So if we save, we will get another list, and the only difference that we have between those two lists is that instead of bullets, we have here proper numbers of list items. Alright, so actually those are the main types of lists which you may come across in the future. One more thing that I want to show you is how to create nested lists. I mean list inside of another list. That's quite easy to do. We just need to insert UL element inside another UL element. Let's create a couple of list items here. Write React, Angular, and Vue. And also change the content of the li element. Right here, libraries and frameworks. So if I save, then we will get nested list right down below the third item. The interesting thing is that nested list has some indentation, and also instead of black bullets, we have here circles. Alright, so that's it about lists in HTML. Actually, all those things will be used in action when we build our project. So you will get a really good experience in how to use those elements in a real world project. Okay, see you in the next video. Okay, so step by step we are moving forward. We have already learned about a couple of HTML elements. And the next thing that I want to discuss in this lecture is how to deal with HTML links. Basically, links are really important parts of any website. It allows us to move from one page to another, or even from one website to another website. So you should definitely know how this element actually works. Alright, let's create here a new comment, links. Actually, before we start creating links, I want to create some space here on the web page in order to make the content visible. For that, I'm going to use a little bit of CSS. So do not worry if you don't understand what this code will mean. You will learn about it in the next section. Let's create just an empty paragraph and then use inline styling. We need to pass here the style attribute, and then let's assign to it margin top with value, let's say 500 pixels. So now, as you can see, we have some space down below the content. Alright, so HTML links are represented by anchor tags. I'm going to open it. And by the way, instead of opening tags manually, I'm going to use Emmet. Using this tool, you don't have to open angle bracket each time. You just need to write tag name like so. And then if we press the tab, the element will be automatically created for us. So in the future, I will use Emmet in order to create elements in kinda easy way. Alright, as you see, link element has an attribute called href. Actually, regarding element attributes, we haven't talked about so far. Each HTML element can have different attributes. Basically, they can provide some additional information about the element. Also, they should be passed in an opening tag, and they are provided by name value pairs. Values should be passed inside quotes. So using href attribute, we can define the destination address of the link. You can specify here the address of a different page or different website. Before we pass here some address, let's just display the link on the page. Insert here some content, let's say click me. If we save, then the link should be displayed on the page. As you can see, it looks in a kind of different way than the rest of the elements. It has some default styles. I mean its color is blue, it is underlined, and if we hover over it, the type of cursor will be changed into a pointer. If we click the link, then by default the page is going to be reloaded, and also the color of a link should be changed. So actually it is the default behavior of the link element. If we don't pass anything inside href attribute, then by clicking the link, the page should always refresh. If we want to avoid reloading the page, we can pass here the hash sign. Now if we click again the link, the page won't be reloaded. In general, hash sign is used to connect links with different sections of the web page with help of ID attribute. Now let's see how we can move from one page to another website. For that we have to pass here URL of any website. Let's say https example.com. Then if we click the link, we will leave the current web page and we will go to the website which we indicated here inside of the href attribute. Alright, so in this case we have left the current web page and we moved to the website, but sometimes when you click the link, the new tab is opened in the browser and you can go to the website in a new tab. I mean without closing the current one. In order to do that, we have to use another attribute called target, which should have the value _blank. Now if I click the link, then the new tab will be opened in the browser and we will be able to go to the website without closing the current web page. Alright, so that's it about HTML links. We're going to use them lots of times when we start building our project. Okay, let's take a quick break here and move on to the next lecture. Alright, so once we learned about links in HTML, now I'm going to move on and show you how to work with images in HTML. Like links, images are very important as well, because every modern website includes lots of images, so you should definitely know how to deal with them. Okay, so images can be defined with the img tag. Unlike the previous elements, the img tag doesn't have a closing tag, so it is called a self-closing tag. As you can see, by default, there are generated two different attributes. First one is called source attribute, which is used to indicate the path of an image, or maybe it can be the URL of the image, I mean the web address. As for the alt attribute, it specifies alternate text for an image. So if for some reason the image is not displayed on the page, then the user will be able to see the text which we pass here. Okay, let's at first consider how the source attribute works. As we said, you can specify here the path of an image. Actually, I have inserted an image in our working folder. You can either use this image from source files or you can feel free and use our own image. It doesn't matter. So if we want to display an image, then we have to pass the path of it inside the source attribute. In this particular case, we have to indicate the name of the image, because our HTML file and the image are placed in the same directory. So let's write here name of the image, html.png. So if I save, then the image should be displayed on the page. As you can see, it's placed right after the link element. It means that both elements are inline level elements. Okay, so that's the way how you can display an image on the page. Now let's go ahead and talk about the alt attribute. As we said, it allows us to display some text on the page if for some reason the image is not displayed. For example, if we insert here some text, let's say HTML5 logo, and then if we change the name of the image, then it will no longer display, and instead of that we will get the text which we have just assigned to alt attribute. Okay, let's get back here the original name of the image, and now suppose that we have an image in a separate folder. Let's create a new folder, call it images, and then move the image into that folder. Now it's no longer displayed because inside the source attribute we have an incorrect path. At first we have to indicate the name of the folder, which is images, and then after the slash we have to specify the name of the file. Now the image is displayed back. Alright, next thing that I want to show you is that we can manipulate on size of the image from HTML using width and height attributes. So if we pass here width attribute, and if we assign to it some value, let's say 150, then the size of the image will be decreased. In this case, height is set as auto, and if we define it manually from here with height attribute, let's assign to it 100, then the height of the image will be changed, but as you can see, the quality of the image is lost and it doesn't look good. So eventually I prefer, and actually I recommend, to work with images, work on styles of the image from CSS, which you will definitely meet throughout the course. Okay, let's get rid of height attribute at all. Next, I want to show how to use links with images. We can use the image as the content of the link. I'm going to wrap the image with link element. And then let's pass here inside of hrefs attribute the same URL which we used above. Now, if I click the image, then we will be moved to the website. But if we pass here the path of image instead of URL, and then if we click the image, it will be opened up in the browser. Alright, so that's it about images in HTML. Let's take a little break here and move on to the next lecture. Okay, so now it's time to discuss one of the most important topics in HTML, and it is forms. On almost every website you should definitely meet forms. For example, when you try to register somewhere, you have to fill up different types of input fields. Also, when you need to log in, again, you need to fill up some forms. So without forms, it's hard to create an interactive web page. Alright, let's go ahead and describe what kind of forms do we have in HTML. First of all, let's make here the comment, forms. So the first thing that you have to do when you want to create forms is to open the form element. As you can see, by default, VS Code has generated attribute called the action. Actually, this attribute is used to specify where to send the data of form when a form is submitted. In HTML5, this attribute is no longer required, so I'm going to get rid of it from here. So the form element is kind of wrapper for different input elements. Now inside of it, I'm going to create at first a label element. Actually, this tag defines a label for an element. As you can see, it has an attribute called for. It specifies which form element a label is bound to. In order to bind a label to an input element, for that, for and ID attributes, ID of the input element, should have the same values. For now, it's not quite important, so let's just get rid of this attribute from here. As the content of the label, I'm going to insert first name. Next, I'm going to create an input element. It creates an input field where the user can enter some data. As you see, it has a type attribute, which by default is set as text. And actually, we're going to leave it as it is. So if I save, then we will get the label and input on the page. As you can see, they are placed too close to previous elements, so we need to create some space, and for that I'm going to introduce you to a new HTML tag called BR, which allows us to create line breaks. So now we have some space here. Besides the BR tag, we also have HR tag, which is used again for separation of the elements. Using this tag, we can create a horizontal line, which actually you see on the page. Let's add here one more BR tag and then continue working on forms. Alright, now I'm going to duplicate those two elements and then change the content of the label. Let's write here last name. Okay, as you can see, we have here two groups of inputs. They are placed side by side because those elements are inline elements. Now I want to place the second group on a new line, and for that I'm going to wrap each group with a div element, which actually is a block level element, and basically it allows us to create some divisions in our HTML document. Mostly div elements are used to wrap some group of elements, and they are very frequently used in real world. So if I wrap both groups with div elements, then they will be placed on a new line. Actually, I think we need some space between them, so let's use again br tag. Alright, next I'm going to show you another type of input. Let's duplicate this group. Then change the text of the label, write here email. And also change the type of input, make it email. So at a glance, there is nothing changed here. We have the same type of inputs. But in fact, the difference between text and email types is that in HTML5 there is added a little validation for email input. This validation works once we submit the form, and actually I will show you it a little bit later. Okay, let's duplicate again this code. The next input type that I want to show you is a password. Let's change here the value of label, make it password. And change the value of the type as well, make it password. So if I type here something, then it should be hidden like it's in real world password input fields. Alright, before we move on and demonstrate how other form elements work, I want to mention that we are able to define values of input fields by default from the HTML code, and we can do that using an attribute called value. So if I type here something, let's say enter first name, then it should be displayed inside the input field. Actually, previously this attribute mostly was used as a placeholder, but it's not quite handy because you need to clear the input before you start writing something. For that there was used JavaScript, and overall it was quite a painful process. In HTML5, thanks to a new attribute called placeholder, we no longer need to do the mentioned things. You can see that the text is gray, and when we start typing it disappears. Actually, you are able to use this attribute for almost every type of input element. Alright, besides those input types, we also have other ones, but I think will be better if we take a little break here and continue talking about form elements in the next lecture. Okay, so in the previous lecture we have described some of the form elements, we have seen different types of inputs, and now let's go ahead and continue describing other types of form elements. First of all, I'm going to duplicate this group of elements. Let's change the content of the label, write message. Also, let's get rid of the input element from here. So the next element that I want to show you is called text area. It gives us a relatively bigger input field, so we are able to enter some bunch of text. Let's assign to it placeholder attribute with some text, enter message. So if we save, then we will get the text area on the page. As you can see, the size of the field is bigger than the other inputs, and also we are able to manipulate on size of it from the bottom right corner of the field. Alright, so that's it about text area. Next I want to show you another type of input, which is called checkbox. Let's go ahead and duplicate one more time div element. Then change the content of label, write here check. Then get rid of text area, and instead of it create input element with a type checkbox. So as you can see, the checkbox is displayed as a square box, and we can check it by clicking on that square box. As you remember, we talked about some connection between label and input elements using for and id attributes, and now I'm going to show you what this actually means. Let's assign to label for attribute and assign to it value check. After that, we have to assign to input element id attribute, which should have the exact same value. So write here check as well. So now those two elements are connected, and what this connection actually means is that if we click the label, then the checkbox will be checked automatically. Basically, this technique is used in CSS when you want to create some click event. Alright, let's move on to the next type of input element, which is a radio button. If we change the type of input element and write radio instead of a checkbox, then we should get radio button on the page. Mostly radio buttons are represented in radio groups, I mean collections of radio buttons to select one of the options. In general, only one radio button in a group can be selected at the same time. If we duplicate the input element and check both radio buttons, then both of them will be selected. Normally, it's not what we want. As we said, we need only one radio button to be selected at the same time, and for that we have to assign to both input elements name attribute, and both of them should have the same values. So now if I check one button and then select another one, only one radio button will be selected. Alright, that's it about radio buttons. Let's move on and demonstrate the last type of input element, which is submit. Let's insert here br tag, and then after it create new input element, which should have type submit. Actually, this type of input element creates the button which allows us to submit the form. Besides the type attribute, we need here value. With the help of the value attribute, we will display some text on the button. Let's say submit. If we click the button, then just the page will be reloaded. But in real world, when you program those form elements, then submit button is used to get the data which user enters in input fields and then store this data in the database. Also, we said in the previous lecture that in HTML5 there is added a little validation to email input. So if I type here something without @ and then click submit, then we will get a little pop-up saying that we should include @ in the email address. Alright, so actually that's it about form elements in HTML. We have overviewed some commonly used input elements, which actually you will need when you work on the project. There are some other form elements in HTML which are not commonly used, and we won't refer to them because I think it would be a little bit boring. Okay, let's move on to the next lecture. Okay, so we are about to finish talking about HTML. We have described lots of different elements, and now in this lecture I'm going to talk about HTML5 semantic elements. Actually, semantic elements are elements which clearly describe their meanings to the browser and to the developer. It's recommended to use them for search engine optimization purposes as well. HTML5 semantic elements are supported in all modern web browsers. Let's go ahead and describe some of them. As you see, I have cleared our previous code, so I'm going to start from scratch. We're going to build a standard structure of a web page, and throughout this process I will show you some semantic elements. The first element that I want to show you is header, which specifies header for a document or for some of the sections on the web page. Let's insert here h1 heading element with some text, let's say website heading. So at a glance there is nothing special about header element, it's just a block level element, but the advantage of it is that it describes very well what kind of content it wraps. Next semantic element is nav. As its name suggests, this element is used to create the navigation. So I'm going to insert here a list with some navigation items. Let's open UL element and insert in it li, which will be followed by link element. And as the first navigation item, let's write home. Then I'm going to duplicate this line of code for 3 times and change content, write about us, then let's say blog, and finally write contact. Actually, for now this list doesn't look like as navigation because it's just pure HTML. We don't use here any of the CSS stuff. But for now it's not the point, I just try to introduce you to HTML5 semantic elements. Okay, next we have a section element which defines section in a document. It groups some content, and mostly this content has the heading. So let's insert here h2 heading element and write as the content section heading. And also I'm going to create a little paragraph with some dummy text. Alright, that's it about section. Next I want to use the article In general, this element is used to define some independent, or in other words, some self-contained content. As the example of article element, we can consider, let's say, blog post, newspaper article, and so on. So let's insert here some text, open p element, and pass here some dummy text. Okay, next I want to show you element called aside. This element mostly is used to create some content, let's say aside from the main content. In most cases we use it to define sidebar. So let's insert here list with some list items. As the first item, write HTML, then duplicate li element for 3 times and write CSS, then JavaScript, and then React. Alright, again, this element doesn't look as a sidebar, it's just placed after the previous content, but I hope that you get the idea of how to use it in a real-world project. Okay, the last element that I want to show you is footer, which mostly is placed down below of the web page, and it defines footer for a document. But sometimes you may see it at the end of some section as well. Alright, as usually inside footer we have some copyright text. Let's open p element and write here some text, copyright. Then in order to insert here copyright sign, I'm going to use HTML entity, which should be written like so. We need ampersand, copy with semicolon. And then write, let's say, code and create, all rights reserved. So here we have our footer. Alright, so that's it. I have shown you some of the commonly used HTML5 semantic elements, and actually we have finished talking about HTML. Now we have to move on and proceed with CSS, so see you in the next lecture.